The courthouse steps felt like ice beneath Sarah McKenna's worn boots, though the Wyoming sun blazed overhead. Her fingers trembled as she clutched the faded blue shawl tighter around her shoulders, the only possession she had left from the mother she barely remembered. Beside her stood Caleb Rivers, tall and steady as the mountains behind them, his calloused hand hovering near her elbow without quite touching. "We can find another way," Caleb murmured, his voice like gravel and honey. "There's a preacher 2 towns over." "We don't have 2 days," Sarah whispered back, her voice catching. The Harmon brothers would be tracking them by now. 3 days she'd been running since she'd escaped their ranch, where they'd planned to force her into marriage with the eldest brother, a man whose cruelty was whispered about in every saloon from Cheyenne to Laramie. Caleb had found her half dead by a creek, offered her water and safety without asking for anything in return. Now he was offering her his name, protection wrapped in a wedding band. If you're enjoying this story, please take a moment to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and give this video a like. It truly means the world to us and motivates us to bring you more quality content like this. Thank you for your support. Judge Marcus Thornwell's office smelled of old leather and expensive tobacco. The man behind the mahogany desk looked carved from granite, silver hair swept back from a high forehead, steel-gray eyes that had seen 1,000 desperate souls and remained unmoved by every one. He didn't look up when they entered, just continued scratching his pen across official documents. "Names," he said flatly. "Caleb Rivers and Sarah McKenna, sir," Caleb replied, removing his hat. "We're here to be married." Now Thornwell looked up, his gaze sweeping over them with the precision of a man accustomed to judging worth. Sarah saw herself through his eyes, a girl of 23 in a threadbare dress, hair the color of dark honey escaping from a hastily pinned braid, eyes too large in a face made gaunt by hunger. Caleb fared little better in his assessment, despite the quiet strength in his bearing. Just another cowboy with dust on his boots and not enough coin in his pocket. "Marriage license costs $5, Thornwell said, returning to his papers. "The ceremony itself is another $3. Do you have it?" Sarah's heart sank. They had exactly $2.30 between them. "Sir, we have," Caleb began. "I'm not a charity, Mr. Rivers." Thornwell's voice could have frozen fire. "I don't marry paupers who can't afford the proper fees. Come back when you've earned honest money." "It is honest money," Sarah found her voice, stepping forward despite the fear coiling in her belly. "Every cent earned by Mr. Rivers' own hands, working a ranch 40 miles north of here." Thornwell's eyes flickered to her face, something sharp and assessing in that glance. A ranch hand's wages. How? Industrious. The sarcasm dripped like poison. "The answer is still no. Good day." "Please," Sarah's voice broke on the word. She reached into her pocket and withdrew the only thing of value she possessed, a small golden locket on a delicate chain. Her fingers shook as she placed it on the judge's desk. "This was my mother's. It's real gold. It must be worth enough." I said no. Thornwell didn't even look at the locket. "The cold judge refused to marry a poor couple. That's what they call me in this town, and I've earned that title through consistency. I will not bend the rules for sentiment or sob stories. Now leave before I have you removed." Caleb's hand settled gently on Sarah's shoulder. "Come on," he said softly. "We'll find another way." But Sarah couldn't move. Something in Thornwell's rigid posture, in the careful way he avoided looking at the locket, struck her as wrong. She'd learned to read men in the hardest way possible, learned which ones would hurt you and which ones were hiding their own pain behind walls of stone. "Why won't you even look at it?" she asked quietly. Thornwell's jaw tightened. "It's irrelevant." "You're afraid to look at it," Sarah realized aloud, taking a step closer to the desk. "Why would a locket frighten a man like you?" "That's enough." Thornwell's voice cracked like a whip, but his hand betrayed him. It reached toward the locket, fingers hovering above it as though it might burn him. Then, with visible effort, he opened it. The change that came over his face was like watching stone crack under impossible pressure. All the color drained from his features. His breath came in short, sharp gasps. Inside the locket were two miniature portraits, a woman with gentle eyes and dark honey hair, and a baby girl with those same large, luminous eyes. "Where did you get this?" Thornwell's whisper was barely audible. "It was my mother's, Elizabeth McKenna. She died when I was 4 years old, in a fire that destroyed our home outside of Independence, Missouri." Thornwell's voice was hollow, distant. The fire was in October, 18 years ago. Sarah felt the ground tilt beneath her. "How could you possibly know that?" Thornwell's hands trembled as he held the locket, staring at the woman's portrait with an expression of such raw anguish that Sarah felt her own eyes sting with tears. When he finally looked up at her, she saw her own eyes reflected back, the same unusual shade of gray-green, the same shape. "Your mother's maiden name," he said hoarsely, "before she married Patrick McKenna. What was it?" I don't know. She died when I was so young, and my father never spoke of her family. He said they disowned her for marrying him." "Thornwell," the judge stood slowly, like a man in a dream. "Elizabeth Thornwell, my daughter, my only child." His voice broke on the last word. "I told her if she married that Irish immigrant, I'd never forgive her. I said she was dead to me. And then she was, actually dead, and I never got to take it back." The office seemed to spin around Sarah. "That's impossible. You can't be—" "You have her eyes," Thornwell whispered. "God help me. You have her exact eyes. And her smile. I saw it just for a moment when you first walked in, before you learned I was going to refuse you." He moved around the desk with surprising speed for a man his age, stopping a few feet from her, as though afraid she might vanish if he came closer. "How did you survive?" "The report said everyone in the house perished." "My father got me out," Sarah managed through the thickness in her throat. "He was badly burned trying to save my mother, but he got me out first. He told me she loved me more than anything, that her family was dead, that we were alone in the world." "Patrick McKenna died 5 years after the fire," Thornwell said. "I kept track. I knew he had a daughter. I hired men to find you, but the trail went cold. Foster families, orphanages, you disappeared." "The Harmon family took me in," Sarah said bitterly. "If you can call it that. I was more servant than daughter, and when I turned 23, they decided I'd marry the eldest son, whether I wanted to or not." Thornwell's face hardened into something frightening. "The Harmons, Lucas Harmon's boys? You know them? I sentenced the father to hang for murder 15 years ago. The sons have kept just barely on the right side of the law since then, but barely." He turned to Caleb, really seeing him for the first time. "And you helped her escape?" Caleb met the judge's eyes steadily. "Found her by Blackwater Creek 3 days ago, more dead than alive. Fed her, got her warm, asked nothing in return. When the Harmon's men came looking, I told her she could keep running alone, or she could let me help." Figured a married woman might have more protection under the law than a single girl with no family. You figured right. Thornwell's voice was thick with emotion. Though I imagine there's more to it than legal protection. Caleb's ears reddened slightly, but he didn't look away. I've worked as foreman at the Double R Ranch for 8 years, sir. I've got a small cabin on the property, savings enough to build something better. I can provide for her, and I swear on my life, I'll never raise a hand to her in anger. She's not property to me. She's a person worth saving, worth everything. Sarah felt tears spill down her cheeks at his words. She'd known Caleb less than a week, but he'd shown her more kindness in those few days than she'd experienced in 19 years with the Harmons. Thornwell was silent for a long moment, his throat working. Then he moved to a cabinet behind his desk, withdrawing official papers and a bottle of whiskey. He poured 3 glasses with shaking hands. I have spent 18 years, he said slowly, punishing myself for my pride. I let my daughter walk out of my life because I couldn't accept that she'd chosen love over my approval. I told myself I was upholding standards, maintaining dignity. The truth is, I was a fool and a coward. He met Sarah's eyes directly. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking, begging, for the chance to be part of your life. If you'll have me. Sarah couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She thought of all the years wondering about her mother's family, creating stories in her head about why they never came for her. The reality was both worse and better than anything she'd imagined. A grandfather consumed by regret, who'd spent nearly 2 decades searching for a granddaughter he'd never met. I don't know you, she managed finally. You were cruel when we walked in. You were going to turn us away without a second thought. I was, Thornwell agreed, his voice rough, because I've spent years building walls around my heart, telling myself that feelings are weakness, that mercy is foolishness. I became the cold judge because feeling anything at all was too painful after Elizabeth died. But you're right here, my granddaughter, my second chance. He looked at Caleb. And you're the man who saved her when I failed to. I owe you a debt I can never repay. I don't want payment, Caleb said quietly. I want permission to marry her, properly, with her family present. Thornwell laughed, a broken sound that might have been a sob. Permission granted, enthusiastically granted. He raised his glass. To family found and love that's stronger than pride. They married that afternoon in the small chapel behind the courthouse, with Judge Thornwell officiating and tears streaming unashamedly down his weathered face. Sarah wore a dress from her grandmother's trunk. Her grandmother, who died 2 years prior, Thornwell explained, never knowing her granddaughter had survived. The dress was cream silk, yellowed with age but beautiful, and it fit Sarah as though made for her. Caleb spoke his vows in that steady voice of his, promising to honor and protect her all the days of his life. When it came time for Sarah to speak, she looked into his dark brown eyes and saw nothing but absolute certainty. I promise to stand beside you, she said softly, to trust you even when trust is hard, to build a life with you that's nothing like the life I left behind. Together, together, Caleb echoed, and when he kissed her, gentle and reverent, Sarah felt something inside her chest crack open, not breaking, but blooming. The celebration that followed was small but joyous. Thornwell closed the courthouse early and took them to the finest restaurant in town, insisting on paying for everything, despite Caleb's protests. Over dinner, Sarah learned about her mother, how Elizabeth had been bright and fierce, how she'd loved reading and riding horses, how she'd argued with her father about everything and made him laugh despite his stern nature. "She would have loved you," Thornwell said to Caleb. "She always championed the underdog, drove me insane with her constant defense of people I considered beneath our station." His face twisted with old pain. "I was such a snob, such an absolute fool." "You were hurt," Sarah said quietly, surprising herself. "Hurt people do foolish things. That doesn't excuse it." "No," she agreed, "but maybe it explains it. And maybe we can start fresh, all of us." 2 days later, the Harmon brothers arrived in town. Sarah was in the general store with Caleb, selecting supplies for their journey back to the Double R Ranch, when they walked in. Silas Harmon, the eldest and cruelest, spotted her immediately. "Well, well," he drawled, his smile predatory. "If it isn't our runaway bride. We've been looking everywhere for you, Sarah girl." Sarah felt ice flood her veins, but Caleb stepped smoothly in front of her, his posture relaxed but ready. "The lady's name is Mrs. Rivers now, and she's got no business with you." Silas laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Mrs. Rivers? She's promised to me, cowboy. Has been since she was 18. Her guardian signed the papers himself before he died." "James Harmon had no legal right to promise her to anyone," said a new voice from the doorway. Judge Thornwell entered, his marshal's badge gleaming on his chest, a position he'd held before becoming judge. Sarah had learned. Behind him stood 2 deputies. "Miss McKenna, Mrs. Rivers, was never legally under your family's guardianship. The documents were forged, which I've now verified. You have no claim to her whatsoever." Silas's face darkened. "You can't. I can, and I have. Furthermore, there are outstanding warrants for your brother Thomas regarding stolen cattle. You'll both be coming with me." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Silas went for his gun, a movement born of rage rather than sense. Caleb moved faster, his own weapon clearing leather with practiced ease, but he didn't fire, just kept it trained and steady on Silas, while Thornwell's deputies moved in. "Go slow," Caleb said quietly, his voice deadly calm. "Real slow. I don't want to hurt you, but I'll die before I let you hurt her." In that moment, watching her husband protect her without violence, Sarah understood that strength came in many forms. Caleb could have shot Silas, probably would have been justified in doing so, but he chose restraint, chose to give the man a chance to surrender. The Harmons were led away in chains, still snarling threats that rang hollow in the face of Thornwell's cold authority. When they were gone, Sarah found herself shaking with reaction. Caleb holstered his gun and turned to her, his hands gentle as they framed her face. "You're safe," he murmured. "I swear it, you're safe now." "I know," she whispered. "I know, because you're here." They left for the Double R Ranch the next morning, but not before Thornwell extracted promises from both of them to visit regularly. He stood on the courthouse steps, watching them prepare to depart, and Sarah saw the grief and hope warring in his expression. "I'll come back," she promised, embracing him. "We'll come back. You're family now." "Family," Thornwell repeated, as though testing the word after years of disuse. "Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for giving an old fool a second chance." The ride to the ranch took 2 days, during which Sarah learned to truly know the man she'd married. Caleb was patient when she struggled with her horse, amusing when she needed distraction, and quiet when she needed space to process everything that had happened. At night, they slept separately, him by the fire, wrapped in blankets a respectful distance away, and she appreciated his restraint, even as she found herself wanting to close that distance. On the second night, lying under stars so thick they looked like spilled sugar, Sarah finally spoke what had been building in her chest. "Caleb?" He was lying on his back, hat pulled low over his eyes. "Why did you help me? Really, you didn't know who I was, didn't know if I was worth the trouble." He pushed his hat back and turned his head to look at her, firelight dancing across his features. "I see a woman worth saving," he said simply. "I saw it the moment I found you by that creek, half drowned and still fighting. You've got steel in your spine, Sarah Rivers. You just needed someone to help you remember it." She sat up, pulling her blanket around her shoulders, and moved closer to him. He watched her approach with something careful in his eyes, like a man trying not to spook a wild creature. "I'm not afraid of you," she said softly. "I want you to know that. When you touch me, I don't flinch because of you. I flinch because of them, because of what they taught me to expect from men." "Sarah, let me finish." She settled beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "But I'm learning that not all men are like them, that some men keep their promises, that some men mean it when they say they won't hurt you." She met his eyes directly. Teach me how to trust this, how to trust you." Caleb sat up slowly, turning to face her fully. His hand lifted, hovering near her cheek, waiting for permission. She leaned into the touch, feeling the calluses on his palm, the warmth of his skin. "We'll go slow," he promised, "as slow as you need. If it hurts, if anything I do ever hurts, you tell me, and I stop. Immediately. No questions, no anger. Understood?" "Understood," she whispered. He kissed her then, soft and questioning, and she kissed him back with growing confidence. When they finally pulled apart, she was smiling, a real smile, possibly the first genuine one of her entire life. The Double R Ranch sprawled across a valley, so beautiful it made Sarah's chest ache. Rolling grasslands, dotted with cattle, mountains rising purple and proud in the distance, a river cutting silver through the heart of it all. Caleb's cabin sat on a small rise, modest but well-built, with a porch that faced the sunrise. "It's not much," Caleb said, helping her down from her horse. "But it's honest work, and the owner, Mr. Reynolds, he's fair. When I've saved enough, I'm planning to buy a piece of land just west of here, start my own small operation." "It's perfect," Sarah said, and meant it. After years in the Harmons' dark, oppressive house, this open space felt like breathing for the first time. The ranch hands welcomed her with friendly curiosity, and Mrs. Chen, the cook who managed the main house kitchen, took Sarah under her wing immediately. Within a week, Sarah had established herself as indispensable, helping with meals, mending clothes, even assisting with the spring branding when extra hands were needed. "You're a natural," Caleb said one evening, watching her coax a skittish calf into the pen with patience and soft words. "Where'd you learn to handle animals like that?" "The Harmons had livestock," Sarah replied, stroking the calf's nose. "I wasn't allowed to do much, but I watched, learned. Animals are honest. You know, they don't pretend to be kind while planning cruelty." Caleb's expression darkened. "I wish I'd found you sooner. Years sooner." "You found me when I needed you most," she countered. "That's what matters." Their marriage deepened slowly, built on daily kindnesses and growing intimacy. Caleb taught her to shoot, standing behind her to adjust her stance, his breath warm against her ear as he murmured instructions. She taught him to read better, He knew the basics, but had never had time for proper schooling, and they spent evenings by lamplight, her voice soft as she read aloud while he worked on saddle repairs. One night, 6 weeks after their wedding, a storm rolled across the valley with furious intensity. Thunder shook the cabin's foundations, and lightning split the sky in jagged brilliance. Sarah woke gasping from a nightmare, fire and screaming, her mother's voice calling her name, and found herself stumbling into the main room where Caleb slept on the narrow cot. "Sarah?" He sat up immediately, alert despite the late hour. "What's wrong? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." She wrapped her arms around herself, shaking. "The storm. It sounds like the fire. I can't." He was on his feet instantly, crossing to her but stopping just short of touching. "What do you need?" "I don't want to be alone," she whispered. "Please, I don't want to be alone." He guided her to the cot, settling her under his blanket before lying down beside her. On top of the blanket, she noted, maintaining that barrier between them even now. His arm came around her shoulders, solid and warm, and she pressed her face against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart instead of the storm's rage. "I've got you," he murmured against her hair. "I've got you, and I'm not letting go." She fell asleep like that, safer than she'd felt since before her mother died. When she woke in the morning, sunlight streaming through the windows, she was still in Caleb's arms. He was awake, had probably been awake for hours, just holding her. "Thank you," she said softly. "Always," he replied, and kissed her forehead with such tenderness that she felt tears prick her eyes. The moment of crisis came in late summer. Sarah was returning from the main house, a basket of eggs balanced on her hip, when she saw the riders approaching. 3 men, moving fast, and even from a distance, she recognized the vengeful set of their shoulders. The Harmon brothers, Silas and Thomas, had escaped custody during a transfer between jails, and they'd brought reinforcements. Sarah dropped the basket and ran, shouting for Caleb. He emerged from the barn, took one look at her face and the approaching riders, and his expression went hard as granite. "Get in the cabin," he ordered. "Bar the door. Don't come out until I say." "Caleb, no!" "Sarah." He gripped her shoulders, his eyes intense. "Trust me. Please. I need to know you're safe so I can end this." She wanted to argue, wanted to stand beside him, but the fear in his eyes, fear for her, not of the danger, made her nod. She ran for the cabin, hearing him call for the other ranch hands, organizing a defense with the calm efficiency of a man who'd done this before. From the cabin window, she watched the confrontation unfold. The Harmons demanded Sarah be turned over to them. Caleb refused, his stance wide and ready. Words were exchanged, ugly and threatening, and then Silas went for his gun. The world exploded into gunfire. Sarah screamed, pressing her hands against the glass, watching helplessly as Caleb dove for cover behind a water trough. The ranch hands joined the fight, but the Harmon's men had superior positions. One of them flanked around toward the cabin, and Sarah realized with sick horror that he was heading for the back door. She grabbed the rifle Caleb had taught her to use, her hands steadier than she expected. When the man kicked in the door, she was waiting. "Don't move," she said, the rifle trained on his chest. "I don't want to shoot you, but I will if you take another step." He sneered, reaching for his own weapon, and she fired. The shot went wide deliberately, splintering the doorframe by his head. The second shot, when he ignored her warning, didn't miss. She aimed for his shoulder, and he went down, cursing. Outside, the fight was ending. 2 of the Harmon's men were down. Thomas was wounded, and Silas had Caleb pinned behind the trough with sustained fire. Sarah saw her husband trying to reload, saw the cold calculation in Silas's eyes as he moved for a better angle. She didn't think, didn't hesitate. She grabbed her rifle and ran outside, firing a shot that forced Silas to duck for cover. It gave Caleb the seconds he needed to finish reloading and return fire. Their eyes met across the yard, and she saw shock and pride and fear warring in his expression. "Get back inside," he shouted. "Not without you," she shouted back and fired again. This time hitting the barrel Silas crouched behind, forcing him to relocate. The marshal arrived minutes later with a full posse. Thornwell had sent them the moment he'd heard about the escape, had sent fast riders to every place he thought the Harmons might target. The remaining fighters surrendered quickly in the face of overwhelming force. In the aftermath, as the wounded were tended and the prisoners loaded into a wagon, Caleb found Sarah sitting on the cabin steps, still clutching her rifle, shaking with reaction. He knelt in front of her, his hands gentle as they took the weapon and set it aside. "You saved my life," he said hoarsely. "You ran into gunfire." "You would have done the same for me," she interrupted. "You did do the same for me. We protect each other. That's what together means." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she held him back with equal fierceness. When he finally loosened his grip enough to look at her face, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "I love you," he said simply. "I have since I found you by that creek, half dead and still beautiful. I love you, Sarah Rivers, and I don't know what I'd do if I lost you." "You love me?" She cupped his face in her hands, searching his expression. "With everything I am." "Then you're in luck," she whispered, smiling through her tears. "Because I love you too. I love your kindness and your strength and the way you've never once made me feel small or weak. I love that you waited for me to be ready. I love that you see me as a person, not property." He kissed her then, deep and thorough and full of promise, and she kissed him back with no fear, only joy. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Come inside," he murmured. "Let me tend that cut on your arm, and then we'll figure out the rest. Together." "Together," she agreed, and let him lead her home. They married again, properly this time, 6 months later, in the small church in town, with Judge Thornwell walking Sarah down the aisle and half the county in attendance. Sarah wore a new dress, cream silk embroidered with tiny blue flowers, and Caleb wore a suit that made him look uncomfortable but devastatingly handsome. The ceremony was simple and perfect. When the preacher asked if anyone objected, Thornwell stood and everyone tensed. Then he simply said, "I want to make clear that I fully support this union, enthusiastically support it. And if anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with me personally." Scattered laughter rippled through the church, and Thornwell sat down, looking satisfied. At the reception held in the town hall, Sarah danced with her grandfather for the first time. He was stiff and formal at first, but she coaxed him into relaxing, and by the end of the song, he was actually smiling. "Your mother would be so proud of you," he said gruffly. "You're stronger than she was, I think. Stronger than I ever gave you credit for being." "I had to be," Sarah replied. "But I don't have to be hard anymore. I can be strong and soft, can't I? Like steel, wrapped in silk." "Like steel wrapped in silk," Thornwell repeated, his voice thick. "That's exactly right." When she danced with Caleb, the rest of the world seemed to fade away. He held her close, his hand warm against her back, and they moved together as naturally as breathing. "Happy?" he asked softly. Happier than I knew was possible, she answered honestly. When I was with the Harmons, I used to dream about escape. But this, you, the ranch, my grandfather, this is beyond any dream I could have imagined. We've built something good, Caleb agreed, and we'll keep building. The land I've been saving for? Reynolds wants to sell me 40 acres adjacent to the ranch. We could have our own place, Sarah. Start a family if you want, or not if you don't. Whatever makes you happy. I want everything, she said fiercely. I want the land, and the family, and the future. I want to grow old with you, Caleb Rivers, watching sunrises from our porch, and teaching our children to ride horses and shoot straight. Then that's what we'll do, he promised, and sealed it with a kiss that made the assembled crowd cheer. Years later, Sarah would sit on that porch, the one they built together on their 40 acres, and watch her grandfather teach her daughter to ride. Caleb would be beside her, silver threading through his dark hair, his hand wrapped around hers. They'd built a good life from the ashes of her old one, built it with trust and love, and the kind of partnership that only comes when two people truly see each other. The scar on her arm from the gunfight would fade, but never quite disappear. A reminder that sometimes love requires courage. That sometimes you have to fight for your happy ending. That the strongest steel is forged in the hottest fire. And when her daughter asked about how Mama and Papa met, Sarah would smile and start the story the way it deserved to be told. Once upon a time, there was a judge so cold he refused to marry a poor couple. He didn't know it then, but that couple would teach him what really mattered. That love is worth more than pride, that family is who you choose, and that sometimes miracles come disguised as second chances. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Sarah and Caleb's journey? Your feedback means the world to us.